Once again, I want to thank everyone for listening on this glorious day of July 10th, 2020. I want to go over some things that, in light of what's been going on in our contemporary period and the recent events and things that are going on with cancel culture and racism and things like that. But I'm going to get more specific on matters that I feel that I find highly hypocritical in one instance, but I think some truth needs to be said on others. Many times that we have seen what the Democrats and the left have often portrayed Trump, they themselves have actually been guilty of. For example, just recently, and this just came out, Steele, of the infamous Steele dossier that was utilized to by the FISA court to illegally spy on Donald Trump and his campaign, had admitted in London court today that his sole client for this dossier that was manufactured with the help of Putin's Russia was in fact Hillary Clinton and the Democrat Party. So as usual, whatever the Democrats have often accused Trump of doing, they themselves are guilty of doing, including weaponizing the government for its own political purposes. Like I just said, the illegal spying on the president campaign, or colluding with Russia during 2016 elections, or even attempting a coup by attempting to take over taking the NSA advisor to President Trump, General Flynn, and manufacturing a prosecution against him to get him removed. Of course, we know why, because he would have been a great obstruction for their attempted coup. But that for another time. So, I would like to, at this time, hold up my little mirror, or I would say the truth mirror, in the faces of the Democrats. Because, before, about racism and throwing racism, because I've been hearing for decades now, the GOP always accuses the Republicans of being racist. Well, let me just say something. Before Trump ever ran for president, did you ever hear anybody call him a racist? I mean, he's been in the public eye for decades. Nobody ever accused him of that. They may have accused him, being a womanizer, having a lot of women, whatever. But he was never accused of being a racist. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, he was one of the greatest social justice fighters against racism towards that involved blacks or Hispanics or Jews. And there's many incidents. I'm not going to go elaborate because you can easily Google them and find them. There's plenty of instances. But, his own social justice was exemplified by Rosa Parks and other black leaders, such as Jesse Jackson, who often praised him for what he had accomplished. In fact, just prior to 2016, Trump was welcomed and praised even by Snoop Dogg and other African Americans in the music industry. Literally the media loved him. They praised him. They also, questioned some things because he's very straightforward, but we've always known that. But even Oprah Winfrey praised him and even had him on a show and even suggested that, he should run for president. But of course, that all changed because when he ran for president with an R instead of a D next to his name, well, things changed. So I always find of curiosity how the Democrats for decades have accused others what they themselves are guilty of. Like I said, using the government as a weapon against its political enemies, or spying on political advisors or adversaries, or even attempted coups and other abuses of power, which they accuse the president of, right, in the impeachment hearings. So, look how much they abuse power with all these draconian measures we have witnessed today and experienced with COVID-19. And most of us all, have heard all of him being accused of being a racist, right? They're always accusing the other guy, the GOP are racist, but who are really the racists? That's my question. So again, I will hold up a mirror for the Democrats so they can look at themselves in this ugly mirror that they are, historically have been, and even in recent times have been, and even today are. So let's go down little memory lane of history and some current events. First of all, racism and the Democratic Party has always go hand in hand, and that's actually a historical fact. So such as what we're witnessing today, I mean, the Democratic Party is still the racist party, which in fact, like I said, currently is. So why are so many African Americans and other minorities, including Jewish Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans, so beholden to this party that was and still is defined by racism? I don't get it. The Democrats have successively indoctrinated children through revisions of fabrications and erasing of history through their about their party. And when that didn't work a little bit, they relied on the lie about switching parties kind of crap, which never occurred. So then when that didn't work, they had to try to manufacture something else. So how did African American leaders, after MLK was died, beginning in the 1970s, suddenly become Democrats? That is a big question mark for the African American community to look at, but also Americans who want to know the truth. I always wondered about that. And I think, in my own insight, I think African Americans are seeing the truth about those leaders and how they've sort of betrayed them, and perhaps for the almighty dollar. Well, why are they so extreme in diversion of their own racist policies, both historically and currently? So why is the Democrats try with every value, whatever exercise they can do, or whatever remedy, try to wipe out history? I mean, why is there so much support for the Democrats, in fact, to destroy the facts and the monuments of history? I mean, why have many, including kids, failed to know the history of the Democratic Party? If you ask any Democrat or any kid, or actually a lot of people, even people who support the Democratic Party, naively or ignorantly have no clue what the precept of the Democratic Party's history is, and it still has evolved and still is. It hasn't changed. I mean, Einstein once said or suggested that if you begin with some kind of false facts in the very beginning as a foundation, then no matter how you perform or proceed in any discussion, or in his case he was talking about even in scientific matters or theories, with even the greatest attempt, the argument fails because the very system of support is based on an actual lie. So no matter if it's all a lie, no matter how much you try to change it, it's still a lie. As they say, you can't put lipstick on a pig, it's still going to be a pig, right? So I will chronically articulate the racist history of the Democratic Party leading to our current times. And perhaps one of the first racist policies of the Democrats was, unfortunately, in the 1824 Indian Removal Act, which forced the removal of all indigenous peoples, such as the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and other Native Americans tribes, which were located in the southeast. I mean, we all know about the infamous Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans perished on this forced trail toward Oklahoma, or the Oklahoma territories at that time. I mean, the Democratic Party essentially was the slave party. Do you understand that? The Democrat Party was literally the slave party. That's a fact. You can't get around that. I mean, the Democrats literally pushed their institutional slavery into the same states in the South where, when they moved all the Native Americans out of there with the 1824 Indian Removal Act in 1824, then what do? They quickly started building more slave plantations. So, I mean, do you see the picture what's going on here? At the very beginning, the very birth of the Democrats was all about their slave industry. Now, the Republican Party, in contrast, was born literally on the nomination of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, the Republican Party, along with Lincoln, were literally the abolitionist party who supported the end of slavery. So the Republicans, again, were the anti-slavery party, and the Democrats were the slave party. Now, it was the Democrats who revolted against Lincoln because he was certainly going to push for the end of slavery. And it was the Democrats who advocated the Confederacy, the statues that they're pushing down and knocking down, they were all Democrats. And the attack on Fort Sumter, which began the Civil War in 1860, yeah, that was a Democrat. And the guy who shot Lincoln after Lee surrendered in 1865, again, that guy was a Democrat. And the guy who, was the big general for, that shut down the slave states and end up winning the Civil War, his name was Ulysses Grant. The statue that up in San Francisco that the left and the Democrats pushed down, he was a Republican. He was a guy who stopped and ended the slavery in literally by force in the South. So, but when Ulysses Grant became president, he didn't just stop there. He sent federal forces against the Democrats, who were then trying to prevent the new free black slaves from voting or entering the electoral process or becoming, into government positions or in offices and having their equal civil rights. Again, that was the Democrats who were preventing blacks from having their own right to vote. The Democrats were preventing that. Okay? In 1868, the Democrats literally created the KKK. Yeah, by the Democrat named Nathan Forrest, who was, again, a former Confederate general. It was a KKK was essentially the military wing of the Democrats for the next 100 years. That's a fact. The KKK was, of course, not only attacked and killed blacks, but they also went after Jews and Italians and later on and during the 50s and 60s, Catholics. Now, along with others, they were not the only white Anglo-Saxons and Protestants. They were literally going anybody who wasn't basically a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant or what they call WASP back in the 60s and 70s for the next 10 or next 100 years. Now, again, that was the Democrat military wing, who very similarly is what we're witnessing today with Antifa and even the BLM, which doesn't even represent really Black Lives Matter, even though they use that name. They have nothing, they're all about Marxism. I'm not going to go there. Anyway, after Grant tried to implement, of course, the equality in the South during his terms of office, when the Democrats, when Grant was no longer there, the Democrats then assumed office of the White House, and they took control of the Congress, and they literally reversed the Reconstruction of the South, which literally ended the equal rights for African Americans. And this brought on, of course, ending their equal rights and, of course, the implementation of Jim Crow segregation laws. Now, the Democrats used their arm wing again, the KKK, to enforce their racist policies. They didn't do this just by any old means, as any African American will tell you from their history. I mean, there'd be lynchings and burnings and, whatnot. They would do a lot of intimidation if anybody rose up ahead and thought for themselves or tried to change that injustice. That injustice was caused by the Democrats. This disgusting racism was due to the Democratic Party. That's a historical fact. But the Democratic Party was not only racist toward blacks, Jews, and Italians. They also mandated a little thing called the anti-Asian racist policies toward the first Chinese in the late 1800s. I mean, it wasn't until Theodore Roosevelt, who was a Republican, which promoted relations with Japan and advocated equality for the Japanese and Chinese Americans in the West. But when his term ended and Taft's ended, both were Republicans, suddenly Woodrow Wilson, the KKK president, a Democrat, took over and ruined the great relationship with Japan, and then started imposing his racist policies for the Japanese. And these banning didn't just stop there. In fact, in California, which was led by Democrats, banned ownership of land by Japanese Americans. So, and they later would push for the banning of immigration of Asians and especially the Japanese in the 1920s. But we should remember who Woodrow Wilson is. I mean, he loved the movie called Birth of a Nation, which made the KKK as heroes. In fact, he routinely had that film aired and shown within the White House. So essentially, he became the KKK president. And there are facts that show how the KKK would march in several of the conventions throughout several states. There's no national conventions that the KKK march on, but they literally march on a lot of state conventions, okay? That's a historical fact. In fact, they're considered prominent amongst the Democrat Party. So let me get this right. Historically, under Wilson, the KKK literally made a resurgence. And before Wilson, the military was integrated, white Americans, and it didn't matter what your ethnicity, they basically were integrated. This is a fact. You can see pictures, there's articles. They're basically, even during the Civil War, they were literally mixed. During the Civil War, they may have not had the officers later. They would after decades, but they were intrinsic within the military. This goes back even during the Revolutionary War. It was mixed. So who ended that? Who segregated the military? That was Woodrow Wilson, the beloved progressive president, the first progressive president. By the way, when they use that progressive, it's really regressive for most everybody who isn't white, okay, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's a historical fact. So anyway, Wilson then not only didn't stop there from desegregation or resegregating the military. In fact, he also ordered the firing of all black employees within all government agencies. Democrat Wilson literally stated, and I quote, "The white men were aroused by the mere instinct of self-preservation until at least there had sprung in existence the great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country." How many Democrat indoctrination schools are named after Wilson, I ask you? The Woodrow Wilson Institute is a Democrat think tank. Think about that. The Democrats have never promoted, even to the day of removing Wilson from any sign or statue. In fact, they advocate that he's the example of their progressive movement, though he was the KKK president. That's a historical fact, as I just stated what he thought of the KKK. Again, the Democrat Party was not only the slave party, but it was the KKK Party. So what it was then, and it still is, as of today, the racist party. The Democratic Party also controlled the states in the South by invoking its KKK armed militia against any dissenters, like Jews or blacks. When when FDR became president, he also advocated a lot of racist policies toward Japan in order to protect, as he thinks of, white Britain. In fact, I did my own dissertations on that and found primary evidence of how they often refer to the Japanese within the FDR's own inner circle. They literally call them yellow monkeys. Yes, FDR's administration referred to the Japanese as yellow monkeys. That's your dear guy, FDR. He was a pure racist. So, I wrote this in my dissertation regarding the Japanese-U.S. relations and how the conflict occurred. But this is just a piece of what I wrote in my closing, and I'll read it to you now. After 1917, U.S.-Japan's closer relations were significantly changed into a perilous journey that would ultimately lead to a conflict in 1941. These dynamics were predicated upon three compelling factors: the American trend of anti-Japanese racist xenophobia, the American government's disinterest in Japan's ideals, culture, and mindset, and America's sudden reversal of its policies toward Japan. After the rise of Japanese immigration in the turn of the 20th century, the new Yellow Peril would be directed toward Japanese immigrants, and this anti-Japanese racism would substantially increase from the 1920s to the 1940s. This anti-Japanese racism would be transformed into American laws and policies, such as aforementioned, the 1924 ban on Japanese immigration, the California ban on Japanese nationals from owning land. These racist policies would be an affront to the Japanese government and its people, and they would prove to be a catalyst in the deterioration of Japanese-U.S. relations. American xenophobia and its growing trend of anti-Japanese would transform into the dismissive ethnocentric attitude of superiority toward the Japanese, racism resulting in a self-imposed ignorance and disconnect of Japanese culture, ideas, mindset by the U.S. government officials. This disconnect of Japan's culture, ideals, mindset would lead to the miscommunication, misunderstandings, which would precipitate the high probability of a conflict. During the Wilson administration, America reversed its policies that had embraced and supported Japan's rise in imperial power in the East Asia region, which included Ted Roosevelt's Asiatic Monroe Doctrine, and instead with the policies that were xenophobic of Japan, undermining Japan in East Asia, followed by drastic economic measures that proliferated during Franklin Roosevelt's administration, causing a reaction after reaction that would drive further down the abyss between these two nations, with the impending catastrophe that could have been avoided. The historical trend of American anti-Japanese racist xenophobia evolved into the American government's lack of interest in Japanese ideals, culture, and mindsets, which would lead to the trend of miscommunications, misunderstandings between the two nations. American reversal of its policy with Japan would have devastating effects between the two nations. Unfortunately, these factors were common denominators that a conflict between these nations was highly probable. What I'm speaking of is, even though I bear me, that was, I know, long, I was trying to point to the factual effects that not only were the Democrats racist back in the 1800s, they were still racist and continuing with their racist and xenophobia well within the 1900s. And these racist trends were all Democrats, including FDR. In fact, FDR imposed, as we know, internment camps for the Japanese, but not on Italians, not on Germans. Why? Because they are white? What about when FDR refused to integrate the military? That's a big question. Why didn't he, Mr. Progressive President? FDR, in fact, blocked Jews who were escaping Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe from coming to the U.S. made them go back to the death camps. This was the illustrious FDR. Okay? I mean, FDR and the Democrats are always promoting racism. Did you see FDR stop the KKK and send in federal forces to allow civil rights and African Americans to vote inside the South? Hell no. It still continued. Why didn't he stop this? He was the progressive president, right? FDR and the Democrats are promoting racism throughout the United States, and this included the anti-Japanese racism by the Democrats in California and in the South, an allowance of the Democrats with their KKK military to impose their racist apartheid in the South. Truman was no different. Truman would never address the Democrats' racist apartheid in the South. In fact, it took a Republican president, a guy named Eisenhower, who went in and imposed the reversal of segregation with the first education, desegregation of education, and he said military forces. Eisenhower literally said the military to impose federal civil rights so that African American could go to any school. Think about that. It was not a Democrat, it was a Republican. And then in 1964, it was the Republicans who voted for the Civil Rights Act, while the Democrats tried to prevent its vote with filibustering. The KKK, by the way, was still in control with the Democrats in the South. So the Democrats are the slave party, the KKK party, and have always been and still is the racist party. So some will make up fake history about the Democrats and the Republicans somehow magically switched, which never happened. Some will say there was a Southern strategy, but that never occurred. There's only one single Democrat that actually became a Republican after 1964 Act. Yes, and Johnson did sign the bill, but it was pushed through by MLK, not by the Democrats. And it was the Republicans who pushed the bill forward and voted it unanimously, but not the Democrats. This cannot be said about the Democrats. I mean, George Wallace was a Democrat. It was Senator Robert Byrd, a Democrat and a KKK leader, who led the infamous filibuster to try to prevent the vote and passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It was the Democrat Richard Russell who also led the Democrats to block the Civil Rights Act. The Democrat filibuster, in fact, lasted over 80 days. And, these might sound familiar names of former KKK members. Al Gore Sr., who happened to be Al Gore's father, and others. I mean, they were all Democrats. Not a single Republican was ever a KKK member. So the Democrats could fabricate the fake Southern strategy all they want and the fake switch. But the fact is, here are the facts. Fact one, there was only one single member, Democrat, that became a Republican after 1964. That's a fact. So there was no switching of party members after 1964. So then they made up this so-called Southern strategy that somehow happened during the Nixon administration or thereafter. That never really occurred, because Nixon never won the South in 1968. In fact, in 1976, Democrat President Carter won the South, and Clinton, in fact, also won the South. So the Southern strategy and the switching of party affiliations are pure BS. They're myths. Fake, made-up crap. Yes, and it's being promoted by leftist academics, though they know damn well it's all fake. And why are they lying? Guess what? Guess they're lying. Guess the lying over and over makes it truth if you keep on repeating it over and over by Democrat standards. But this sounds very reminiscent of another leftist, the globalist theory, led by the leftist Nazi Party. Sounds really familiar, right? Here's some more little history for you. In the 1970s, Vietnamese refugees who were after the Vietnam War ended, and a lot of political refugees from Vietnam were trying to come back to the United States. And when they did, Democrat Governor Jerry Brown, that progressive left-wing Democrat, he tried to stop and not allow the Japanese refugees to relocate in Southern California. You know where? Orange County. And you know why Orange County is so Republican? That's why, okay? So, don't tell me he was such a Mr. Civil rights and progressive. Oh yeah, he was a progressive. Because progressive literally is a racist. Because that's where it started. Wilson. So when you think of somebody calls themselves progressive and they're white, you know what? That's like called the left white supremacists. Probably the best way of calling it. So anyway, Brown himself was an anti-Asian racist. And Brown's record shows for itself. I mean, the Asian community sees it and spoke about it back then. And you think Jimmy Carter was all that? I mean, when the Iranians, when the Shah of Iran fell in 1979, and Iranians, and I know this from personal experience, were trying to get the hell out of Iran, and were trying to come in the United States because he loved the Iranian people so much. Jimmy Carter, your lovely Democrat, progressive, banned entry from any Iranian from entering into the United States. So please, don't tell me about his lovely record. You know, I can go on about other things Jimmy Carter did, but I won't even go further. So, here, another thing that happened, which I thought was sort of striking, because now we have Mr. Illustrious Joe Biden running for president. Here's a little bit about him and the Democrats since the 1970s, since Biden literally started his Senate career in the 70s. So in the 1970s, Biden and most of the Democrats advocated against desegregation. In fact, they opposed busing. I mean, I don't always agree with Kamala Harris. Very rarely would I ever. But she was spot on when she questioned his racist policies and advocated against busing. In fact, this is what racist Biden actually said. Fact for verbatim. Biden stated racial integration policies would cause his children to grow up in a racial jungle unless we do something about this. My children are going to grow up in a jungle. The jungle's being a racial jungle with tensions having built so high that's going to explode at some point. Was he referring to a jungle when he told all you blacks better vote for me or you ain't black? That kind of jungle? Biden has consistently made racist remarks. I mean, when you go to 7-Eleven, there's always one of those Indians who work in it. I mean, I can go on and on about his little racist remarks about Jews, about blacks, about Hispanics, about Indian Americans. I mean, it's been consistent. But I will go into that in another day. But you can see why he supported, also, I mind you, Biden supported the KKK leader, Democrat Robert Byrd, and even spoke at his funeral with great praise. In fact, he gave a eulogy on behalf of the KKK leader Robert Byrd. So regarding the fake switch in the 1970s, here's a little fact that there was never a switch. Robert Byrd, the KKK senator from West Virginia, was the Senate Majority Leader of the Democrat Party throughout the 1970s. Let me repeat that again. Senator Robert Byrd, the KKK leader, was the Senate Majority Leader of the Democrat Party throughout the 1970s. So where was the switch? Hillary Clinton called Democrat Senator Robert Byrd her mentor. Pelosi, in fact, has his bust displayed in her office. And like I said, Joe Biden praised him in a eulogy. And in fact, overwhelmingly, Democrats often praise Byrd. Yet, this is what Byrd had said. This is the guy who they thought was an esteemed leader. Byrd, quote unquote, said, "I shall never fight in the armed forces with a Negro by my side. Rather, I should die 1,000 times and see old glory trampled in the dirt, never to rise again, to see this beloved land of ours become degraded by race Mongols and a throwback to the blackest specimen from the wilds." That's how he portrayed the Africans, like they're some wild tribe, and calling them race Mongols. Are you kidding me? This is the guy. This is who is running now for president. That he praised him. Again, Byrd was the Democrat Senate Majority Leader during most of the 1970s. That's the real, true racist story of the Democrats. And we all know the Democrats are desperately trying now to re-erase history because, point of fact, the Democrat Party is the slave party. The Democrat Party is the KKK Party, and the Democrat Party is certainly the racist party. The Democrats still have names on buildings and institutions and even schools by Democrat KKK members and other racist members. I mean, like I said, Pelosi, she never removed the statue bust of KKK leader Robert Byrd in her office, has she? And there's still a statue, by the way, in the Senate halls of Robert Byrd still there. Why hasn't this statue been removed? And by the way, the Senate office building, guess what that's named? It's called the Russell Senate Office Building, named after, like I said, Democrat KKK segregation who desperately tried to prevent the 1964 Act. Russell, Robert Russell, from becoming a land. I mean, Bill Clinton praised Senator Fulbright, who also had ties with the KKK and was an ardent racist toward both Jews and blacks, and who also was very much involved in trying to prevent the Civil Rights Act from being a law. So my question is, why did blacks such as Lewis, Cummings, Jackson, Sharpton, and others become Democrats in the 1970s, knowing the racist history of the Democrat Party and the leader of the Senate was the KKK leader Robert Byrd in the 1970s? This happened during the 1970s, folks. These same leaders are sitting now in both Congress and Senate. These are African Americans, and I'm talking about the Black Caucus too. Did they just somehow sell their souls to the white KKK devils in the 1970s? And they still do. I mean, could money have been part of it? I mean, they're pretty wealthy, aren't they, since that time? I mean, how have the African Americans done in the last 4 decades with black Democrat caucuses? I mean, in 4 decades of monolithic African support of Democrats every 2 to 4 years, even black Democrats running their communities. I mean, you look at it from Chicago to New York to Philadelphia, Los Angeles. I can keep on going on and on. Every city that there's a Democrat running it with black Democrats involved, besides other Democrats. What have they really done for the black community? Tell me again, who's the real racist? Please tell me again. I mean, Trump, in fact, reversed Biden's racist 1990s law that was targeting African Americans and other minorities. Remember that famous saying that Biden sort of said, get rid of the predators, the black predators? Trump also has also pushed and targeted what is called the economic zones in African American communities. Was that racist? No. He was trying to make the betterment of American communities that were forgotten for 4 decades by the Democrats, including the African American Democrats. who run those communities for 4 decades. You don't see Maxine Waters starving. She lives in a multi-million-dollar house, and you should see all the homes around it. She's been there for decades. She's been there since the 80s. Go take a drive. If you're ever in Los Angeles, head to South Central. What has she really done for them? So, Trump, though, has diminished black unemployment. In fact, before COVID, was at its historical low for blacks and minorities and women. I mean, he's diminished black poverty while promoting black businesses and black opportunities in the labor force. I mean, Trump even financed black colleges that even Obama never did. And what did Obama and the Biden campaign, presidency for 8 years, what did they ever accomplish for the African American community or minority communities? Tell me. Did they they had actually more poverty and more unemployment, and their businesses were not flourishing, that's for sure. And they couldn't even finance black colleges. It took the white president Trump to finance the black colleges continually. I mean, if you hear the story of them coming back every year, and he made it, why are you coming here every year? So who's the real racist? It's always been the Democrat Party. I mean, Trump has even advocated for school choice. Think about this, school choice. African American communities and minorities could have an equal quality of education like the white people in the suburbs. Think about that. It was sort of the idea in a way like, oh yeah, busing that Biden was against. Why is he advocating charter schools? So that people can have, African Americans and other less fortunate minorities could have the same quality of education as choice. What's wrong with school choice? If you're pro-choice, wouldn't you say you're school choice too? Or African Americans? So they can have equal opportunity and lift themselves with education. Guess what that does? Opportunities for jobs, employment, better standard of living, better understanding of how our government works, better studying how to vote, how to do things, better themselves. The whole point of that is they better themselves. So what is racist? Giving a quality education for African Americans, is that somehow racist? Or trying to keep the black man and black woman and the black family down? Which is racist? With that history of racism that I just mentioned. So who are the real racists? I mean, historically and contemporary, the fact is the Democratic Party is the slave state, and it was the KKK party, and it still is the racist party. I ask, when will the Democrats ever remove that KK Democrat majority leader of the 1970 statue from their grounds in the Senate, or Pelosi's own office, where she has his bust, bird, or Wilson's name, who was promoted and supported the KKK and its lynchings of blacks, and yes, there were lynching of Jews and Catholics. I mean, just Google Robert Burt's name on buildings, institutions. There are hundreds, but they're not being called to be removed. Any of you ever heard a Democrat talking about removing the Woodrow Wilson Institution, or Wilson's High School, or Wilson this or that? No. Why? And like I said, what is the name of the Senate office? That is a curious one. I mean, it's the Russell Building. The KKK, Democrat KKK segregation racist. The guy who tried to stop the Civil Rights Act. Senator Richard Russell. So please, don't tell me when they're calling the Republicans ever racist, they better look at themselves in the mirror, because they are the epitome of racism. If you want to know who are the racists, like I said, you just have to stare at the Democrats. If they want to remove an image or a name or something, maybe the Democrats should start with changing their name, because their name, the Democrats, is all about racism. It is all about slavery. It was the KKK. So my greatest question is how any, and I still boggles my mind, how any African American became a Democrat when the racist bird was a Democrat senator majority leader for most of the 1970s. When he referred to blacks as the race of mongrels. I mean, Lewis, Cummings, Jackson, I mean the entire black caucus. What did they do? Sell their souls for that, to be the slave handler for their leftist white supremacists, AKK Democrats? I mean, really, go figure. I mean, I'm really thankful that many African Americans are waking up. Maybe they always have on their first time speaking up. But they're also being attacked. They're called racist names like coons and all kinds of disgusting racist stuff. Not by white people, by their own African Americans who are acting like slaves to their masters. I hate to tell it like that. I mean, literally, to think freely and think independently. There are certainly thank God, real black leaders that are coming out of the picture. Maybe I wasn't aware of, but they're certainly more and more the ones I don't not even aware of. Every day I'm seeing new voices coming out. I'm so thankful for that. I mean, people like Tim Scott, which I can see as a future president one day, or Candace Owens one day as being a great senator, or Sonny Johnson, and etc., who truly don't live in that Democrat slave plantation. They get it. They understand it. They don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat or anything. They think with their own individual minds. That's freedom. Not being a slave is being monolithic. Doing what the other guy tells you to do. Allowing a guy like Snoop Dogg or somebody else, hey, you better do this, otherwise you're this or that. That's slave mentality. I'm telling you, I may be straight up, maybe I'm harsh. Like a lot of my friends say, I'm straight, sometimes too harsh. Because I tell it like it is. But that's being a slave. That's saying to, yeah, master, Democrat, whatever you say, I'm going to vote for you, Mr. Biden. You're free. I'm free. We're all free. That's what makes us American. We don't have, listen to the words of probably one of my heroes. I'm almost in tears thinking about it. Because I remember his words. And I was only 10 years old. MLK, Martin Luther King said it. When he said, don't even look at a person's skin, whether they're black or white, Jew or Gentile, no matter what. You look at the person by their merit. That's what we need to be. That's what we're about. That's actually what Donald Trump is about. I tell you the truth. But they call him a racist. He only looks at people for what they are. And what they can do. Not by their color of the skin. Not by their ethnicity or religion. Not by their sexual orientation. It's by your merit. What you do. That's your merit. That's what MLK was talking about. Being free is being free to independently think for yourself. Being free to speak freely how you think. That's free speech. My generation, what they call the original liberals, liberal meant, by the way, open-minded, thinking openly. That was free speech. The so-called the liberals today aren't liberals. By far not. They're the opposite of liberal. They are actually fascists. By the way, fascism is leftist, so I'm not going to go into it. It's totalitarian, leftist. Nazism was leftist, so you can see where that's going. AOC is leftist, but a fascist. There's one and the same. It's sort of funny when they say fascism. If you don't believe me, read Mussolini's doctrine of what fascism is. He literally calls it a leftist movement. It was socialism. So, what are we? We're Americans. We embrace the ideas. We're not perfect by any account. That's not. We have gone far. I mean, I remember how it was in the 60s. I remember in the 60s where a Jew could not even go buy certain properties, certain places, and African Americans couldn't even go places. I remember those days. I remember days I couldn't even mention that I was Jewish, or they even thought I was Jewish. People don't even think I'm Jewish when I'm walking around, because they don't know what does Jew look like. Even though we are an ethnicity, we're not a religion. I'm not going to go there. I remember those days. We've come far. I mean, we still got a lot of ways to go of certain things, but we're going backwards. We're certainly going backwards, and the reason why we're going backwards is one reason only. The Democrat Party wants to promote racism because they are the racist party. Divide and conquer. Keep them divided. And they've got control of the Black Caucus because they're bought and sold with the almighty dollar. And I'm telling you, go in the 70s, go see how much money they've gained throughout the years. Out of nowhere, suddenly they have money here and there. Believe me, they were taken care of. So, do you get it? I believe in my heart, hopefully more and more Americans, including African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, in fact, all Americans, recognize the historical and contemporary truth. The fact is, the Democrats have lied and lied and lied. And that's why they're so desperate to rewrite history. So my question for you is, have you taken your red pill and awakened to these truths? Are you among the awakened? I'm an optimist. I believe in my heart things are going to happen. So it almost gets to me. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening, and God bless you all.